Arratsaldeon. Bueno, vamos con la segunda parte de esta tarde. Esta segunda parte va a ser en inglés, ¿vale? Es decir, que si alguien no se siente cómodo escuchando en inglés, ¿vale?, puede salir a la parte de fuera donde Sara está haciendo la traducción más o menos simultánea, ¿no?, con todo el esfuerzo. Voy a haceros una breve presentación en castellano de las tres personas, luego ya las pasaré a presentar en inglés y ya directamente uno detrás de la otra harán su presentación. La primera ponente esta tarde, esta segunda parte de la tarde, es Carmen Magallón Portolés. Ella nos viene de Alcañiz, de Zaragoza. Bueno, tiene un amplísimo currículum, ¿no? Doctora en Ciencias Físicas, licenciada en Ciencias Físicas, diploma de Estudios Avanzados en Filosofía, posgrado de Historia de la Ciencia. Pero, bueno, por resumir, diríamos que es hoy en día la presidenta y ha sido durante muchísimos años la directora de la Fundación SIP, del Seminario de Investigación para la Paz de Zaragoza, y la presidenta de WILPF España. Ella nos va a hablar de voces disidentes contra la guerra y las armas, y Carmen sí que va a hablar en castellano, ¿vale? La segunda ponente es Heidi Meinzolt. Heidi es miembro de la Women International League for Peace and Freedom de Alemania desde hace más de 30 años. Ha sido miembro del comité ejecutivo durante muchos años y ha servido de coordinador europea en este periodo. Fue también coordinadora de WILPF en el Middle East y miembro del comité y de la Organización de Desarrollo. Bueno, tiene un currículum también amplio y bueno, tiene una trayectoria muy larga en WILPF. Ella nos va a hablar de nadie puede ser neutral en temas de guerra y paz. Y la última ponente de esta tarde, Joy Ada Oniesó, es la presidenta de WILPF Nigeria y WILPF Internacional, ¿no? Fue vicepresidenta de WILPF entre 2014 y 2018 y ha trabajado en diferentes temas y capacidades en muchas organizaciones. Y hoy nos va a hablar de un acercamiento integral de la seguridad y de la construcción de paz, ¿vale? Bueno, paso a presentarlas en inglés. We will have this afternoon 3 speakers. Carmen Magallón Portolés will talk about dissident voices against war and against guns. Carmen will speak today in Spanish. Carmen has a terrible curriculum, but in order to sum up, I would say that nowadays is the president of the Seminario de Investigación para la Paz from Zaragoza and the president of WILPF Spain. Our second speaker comes from Germany, Heidi Meinzolt. Is a member of WILPF Germany for more than 30 years. She has been a member of the International Board for many years and served as European coordinator in this period. Heidi was also the coordinator of WILPF Middle East Working Group and a member of the Standing Committee of Organizational Development. While being involved in multiple ways in structural and governance issues, Heidi has been working in the past years to intensify WILPF's political impact, bridging theory with practice. Her major concern is raising awareness among the general public about the importance of a feminist analysis of conflicts, highlighting aspects of justice, human security, and freedom. Apart from her work with WILPF, she is also involved with the Civic Solidarity Platform as the coordinator on the women and gender realities in the OSCE region, and she cooperated with the Women Engaged for a Common Future on issues of climate justice and SDG. For Heidi, being the Europe regional representative means strengthening cooperation across WILPF sections, coordinating WILPF's impact on political decision makers, and institutions in Europe while fostering dialogue with partner organizations and creating synergies with other world regions. Heidi will talk about no one can be neutral in questions of war and peace. And to finish this afternoon, Joy Ada Onieso will talk about integrated approach of security and peace construction. Joy Ada is a passionate feminist peace builder. She's the director of WILPF Nigeria and was an international vice president of WILPF between 2014 and 2018. Previously, Joy worked in different capacities across several organizations, developing expertise that span from management and organizational development to advocacy for a feminist political agenda. She has over a decade of experience working as a consultant on women, peace and security, as well as 5 years of experience in transformative leadership. Joy is also the founder and president of a foundation that provides support to indigent communities and people living in Nigeria. In her role as WILPF International President nowadays, Joy sustains movement building by embracing the transformation of gender power structures and engaging sections in content sharing through various mediums. So, yours is the floor, Carmen.
Arratsaldeon, a ver si lo digo bien. Good afternoon, and gracias a Gernikako, María, todo el equipo por invitarnos aquí a estas jornadas. I'm very pleased to be with my colleagues Joy and Heidi here in this panel. Yo, después de los análisis magníficos de nuestras compañeras, Manuela y Tika, lo que voy a hacer es sencillamente poner un punto sobre la mesa, que es necesitamos sacar a la luz las voces disidentes contra la guerra y a favor de resistencia no violenta. Es decir, no negar que existe una tradición, existe una historia y que tenemos que trabajar sobre ella, reivindicarla y sacarla a la luz. Porque es cierto que los poderes mediáticos y los poderes hegemónicos no lo ocupan todo. Y si lo ocupan, no lo tendrían que ocupar. Es decir, las voces minoritarias, las voces que se levantan, bueno, algo ya nos han mencionado, voces que surgen en Ucrania, voces que surgen en Rusia, pero también nuestra propia tradición del movimiento por la paz. O sea, yo me coloco ahí en esa posición porque efectivamente desde los años 80, o sea, hace 40 años que estamos en el movimiento por la paz, en situación en donde había una amenaza nuclear, fuimos capaces de levantar un movimiento que hoy parece que no es posible, pero seguramente es posible hacer más de lo que estamos haciendo y decir más y recuperar toda esa tradición que existe. Y por eso quiero mencionar y dedicar mis palabras a Howard Clark, que fue presidente de la Internacional de Resistentes a la Guerra y que trabajó durante años pues, por sacar a la luz pues, todas las estrategias de no violencia. Y sí que existen ejemplos y casos. El otro día, a través de Twitter, alguien me preguntaba, bueno, pero ¿ha habido en el pasado experiencias ante una invasión, experiencias de resistencia no violenta? Y bueno, yo he querido traer a colación, porque muchos de aquí somos de centros de investigación para la paz. Creo que una de nuestras tareas, aparte de los análisis de las situaciones, es volver a recuperar de la historia esos ejemplos que muestran que ha habido resistencia no armada a situaciones duras, no solo de falta de derechos humanos, sino incluso de agresiones armadas. Y aquí por eso he traído el libro, una guía de resistencia civil, una bibliografía del poder de la gente para la protesta no violenta. Creo que es importante y es un tema que teníamos un poco abandonado en nuestros centros. Ahora tenemos que sacarlo a la luz y tenemos posibilidades. Un ejemplo paralelo es, hace también como 30 años, yo que estudié física, también TICA, no había mujeres científicas españolas. Entonces no había, claro que había. Empezamos a investigarlas y hoy, o sea, la capacidad heurísticas de esa línea de investigación se ha demostrado. Hay cantidad de estudios sobre las científicas españolas de principios del siglo XX, hasta tal punto que puede considerarse una moda y falta por trasladarlo a los libros de texto, pero lo que no había, lo hay. Y creo que está en nuestras manos, es la tarea de recuperar esa tradición de no violencia y de resistencia civil. Y como también estamos en un momento de celebración para WILPF, he querido traer un ejemplo histórico y honrar a una mujer de WILPF que fue presidenta de la rama, de la sección de WILPF francesa, que fue Gabrielle Duchesne. ¿Y por qué? Bien, porque un ejemplo histórico que cuadra mucho con la situación actual de Ucrania es cuando una coalición franco-belga invadió el Ruhr en Alemania, la zona de Alemania en el año 1923-1924. WILPF ya había avisado de que el Tratado de Versalles ponía una semilla para una nueva guerra mundial. Lo criticó el Tratado de Versalles y justamente las condiciones que habían impuesto a Alemania de pago, pues por ser los perdedores y a los que se culpaba por la guerra, eran draconianas. En un momento dado, la zona del Ruhr, que era rica en carbón y en madera, tenía que pagar esos impuestos marcados por el Tratado de Versalles, dejaron de pagar. Y un ejército de Francia y Bélgica invadieron la zona, la invadieron militarmente. Y es muy interesante este ejemplo, que nuestros amigos de Historia Económica nos han ayudado a profundizar en él, porque de algún modo muestra también lo que se decía antes, las vinculaciones que hay entre los comportamientos de un país y de otro. En un momento dado, cuando invaden para forzarles a pagar, pues hay una resistencia de los trabajadores de la zona, apoyados por el gobierno de Berlín, porque estaban en la zona alemana, se niegan a trabajar y resisten con brazos caídos, con lo cual la moneda alemana cae, aumenta la inflación y entonces efectivamente ya no pueden pagar. Es decir, lo que habían intentado por la fuerza acaba siendo deteriorado por la propia consecuencia del uso de las armas y de la ocupación. Finalmente, digamos, históricamente, el tema se resuelve porque descubren que solamente hay una vía, que es un plan que hacen Francia, Alemania y Bélgica, los países europeos, para sacar adelante la economía alemana como una forma, la única, para que pudieran seguir pues, colaborando en el pago de la deuda, pero todos juntos, de modo que fue una colaboración. Pero, ¿qué hicieron nuestras compañeras de la Liga Francesa de Mujeres por la Paz y la Libertad? Pues ellas se opusieron a la invasión del Ruhr, a la invasión alemana, y propusieron medidas políticas para solucionar el conflicto. Eran 3 puntos que tengo aquí, que eran los siguientes: someter la cuestión de las reparaciones de guerra a una corte internacional imparcial. Segundo, tratar la cuestión no solamente de manera aislada, sino como parte del problema más amplio de la reconstrucción de Europa. Y el tercer punto, retirar la ocupación armada de la zona. esos 3 puntos. Quisieron reunirse con el presidente francés, que era Poincaré, y finalmente no pudieron hacerlo, pero escribieron cartas abiertas, etc. Ellas en ese momento no podían votar, no podían votar, pero plantean este plan como una acción política que finalmente ven que no tiene cauce porque no tienen la posibilidad de entrar más que a través de esas propuestas que hacen en la prensa. Y entonces, ¿qué hacen? O sea, la caída de la moneda y de la economía alemana había producido una hambruna terrible en la zona del Ruhr, o sea, morían los niños de hambre, etc. Y en esos momentos no había todo el sistema de ayuda humanitaria que hay hoy. ¿Y ellas qué hacen? Pues proponen un plan de ayuda a los niños de la zona, que es como una especie de adopción, y lo hacen no tanto desde la perspectiva humanitaria, que también, sino como una propuesta política. Dice, si no aceptan nuestras condiciones políticas, vamos a hacer esta adopción de niños para que no mueran y como un acto de reconciliación. Bien, hay que decir que, como en todos los casos, pues no toda la población francesa no estaba de acuerdo con esas propuestas. Dijeron, no, resulta que los niños el norte de Francia sufrieron muchísimo en la Primera Guerra Mundial, pues ahora que sufran los alemanes del Ruhr. O sea, hay siempre en la población ese deseo, a veces de venganza, pero también en el plano de la sociedad civil, como se dice, pues las alemanas en un momento dado, también las alemanas de WILPF, plantean hacer una casa de la reconciliación en el norte de Francia, que es donde había sido muy dura la guerra, la Primera Guerra, y las francesas pues hacer la adopción de niños partiendo de aportar 1 franco por día, o sea, 30 francos al mes. Bueno, es un ejemplo histórico. Finalmente, en el 24, tiene que retirarse la ocupación por cuestiones de tipo económico y por este rechazo, pero es un ejemplo de reacción de una población de manera no violenta ante una invasión. Por eso hay más ejemplos históricos. Por eso recuperemos en el libro, y hay otros libros de Michael Randall, de la IRG tiene publicados varios libros sobre acciones no violentas. Por supuesto, conocemos el caso de la India, pero también hay casos de la Segunda Guerra Mundial. Y volviendo a la actualidad, cuando nos preguntan a los pacifistas, pues, ¿qué hacer ante una guerra? Decimos no. Nuestro tiempo no es como el de los que tienen armas que mañana las usan. Nosotros no podemos reaccionar. Nosotros, con los métodos y con nuestros planteamientos, no podemos ganar una guerra. Con los métodos y con los planteamientos de resistencia civil, posiblemente tampoco. Pero podemos salvar vidas y podemos salvar un futuro de esperanza de que hay otras posibilidades. Por eso, la importancia de la disidencia, aunque sea pequeña, aunque nuestra voz sea un poco, esté en los márgenes, pues tenemos que salir a decirlo. Y eso siempre comprendiendo a la población que está sufriendo allí. Es verdad. Y no juzgando que se defiendan incluso con las armas. No vamos a juzgarles, pero no vamos a hacer un canto a las armas. Yo he escrito a una amiga ucraniana que conocemos, ¿no? Hanna, y que le ofrecimos la casa, y dijo, ella que es en la sensibilidad WILPF y estaba a punto de entrar, dice, yo ahora he descubierto que si sigo viviendo es por las Fuerzas Armadas ucranianas. Por tanto, si WILPF defiende que no hay que usar las armas, no puedo estar en WILPF. Es decir, esto hay que ponerlo sobre la mesa y esto nos conmueve y nos llega, efectivamente. Seguramente si estuviéramos en ese lugar diríamos lo mismo, pero no estamos en ese lugar, estamos en otro. Podemos comprender a los que están sufriendo allí y, sin embargo, levantar esa otra voz porque es otra esperanza, es decir, la voz de la no violencia, la voz de que no tenemos por qué volver a repetir los dramas del pasado, de matar y morir, el derecho a no matar, que dicen los resistentes a la guerra de la IRG, derecho a no matar, derecho a desertar, aunque luego es verdad que van a estar mal vistos y van a estar con incapacidad para volver a su país, pero es una esperanza para el futuro. O sea, esa esperanza creo que puede estar en nuestras manos y aunque sea minoritaria y aunque sea dolorosa y aunque comprendamos que se usen las armas, pues creo que tenemos que levantar esa voz. Yo decía también a mis compañeras, estoy leyendo hasta pues, un libro sobre el levantamiento de las mujeres judías en el gueto de Varsovia para comprender por qué decidieron hasta tomar las armas, porque realmente estaban pasando, para comprender, ¿no? Hay que comprender a las que están en otro lado, pero comprender no significa adoptar sus posiciones cuando nosotros estamos en otra posición. Y ojalá podamos sacar investigación sobre más elementos históricos, sobre la no violencia, y lo llevemos a las escuelas y pueda haber una línea de investigación que diga no solo las armas están ahí, también estamos con otras capacidades y posibilidades. Gracias.
Gracias. Estoy... Okay. Estoy muy emocionada de estar para la primera vez a Gernika. Gracias, María, Andreas, etc. Porque como alemana es una grande responsabilidad, conociendo la historia, no solo Picasso, pero es veramente para mí un momento muy importante. Yeah. But I have to speak in English because I understand, and especially I understand you, because I'm working also a lot on the historical questions from history to the present and how to envision future. But it's to express complex ideas, it's too complicated. So when I said that no one can be neutral in questions of war and peace, this has to do with emotions, of course. And I think we are all suffering with the people now under the bombs, in shelters, and those who have to go to exile, who left everything behind, and also, and mostly, women with children now that we see in our countries under the always big danger of trafficking. Already we have in all our train stations in Germany, we have now don't accept quickly if someone is offering you shelter or house, because this is really a big problem. But also men forced to fight who never, ever thought about it. And yeah, what can we do? We hold the contacts, we try to be in solidarity and compassion. We hear the stories, but as you said, we keep our critical analysis. And we have all just questions for the moment, I think, and very few answers. How can this war again happen? And also, how can we stop this war? And these wars happen again and again. A terrible demonstration of toxic masculinity, of militaristic power, of geostrategy. And I was a bit skeptical when I saw the title here on women and, or the peace and geostrategy. Is this really our approach? Because geostrategy is always accompanied by lies and manipulation in all wars, and influencing very quickly all politics and all politicians. Yeah, the same question throughout our feminist history. And have we as civil society, inspired by our sisterhood, by our fruitful connections beyond borders, our long-term cooperations, all the exchanges, the trainings, the disarmament initiatives, our wonderful analysis of root causes of violence, have we done enough to avoid such an escalation as now? Why couldn't we convince the political mainstream to stick to diplomacy and not to war rhetoric, the weapons delivery and new NATO membership? I have just experienced with a Finnish friend, we have composed an open letter to the Finnish Foreign Minister Pekka Haavisto that I personally knew when I was young and in the Green Party. Yeah, why can you, with this fear in the population of the Russians, how can you, who was always in favor of OSCE structures, who strengthened not the NATO, how can you plead now for NATO? And this Finnish friend, she brought the letter to him, and she said, I haven't got an answer. He even does not answer anymore to this question. And it's not just the whole horrible NATO story from the past and from the present that we know, this militaristic problem, but take it as a neutral country into the future is really something where I don't know what answer we can give to this anymore. So I think the only answer that we can give is what you also mentioned, that, and you both, is that we care about the people. And this is we care about life, about dignity and justice. And yeah, we continue to care. And I read again, and this is what you asked me also, what Petra Kelly has said and written on Gernika. There is a book she published with Gerd Bastian, Gernika and the Germans, and full of this horrible history on the one side, but also on how she tried to to make it known to the German public and to, talk about this unsatisfying excuse of the German government for the bombardment, not just here, later in Warsaw, Coventry, Rotterdam, and others. She was conscious that there is never an excuse for war crimes, but also that silence is the worst. She saw impunity as a driving force blocking necessary reconciliation and healing. And I met Petra Kelly at several occasions, and she was really a strong advocate for peace, but she could not finish her mission. And at the 5th anniversary of her death, I organized a conference in Munich in cooperation with the Petra Kelly Foundation, which is the Green Foundation in Bavaria, where I live. I had invited a representative of the Dalai Lama, because Petra Kelly was very much committed to the Tibet question and peace there, but also someone from Gernika. I could not find who was the person who was present in Munich at the time, and I'm still curious to know if there is still connection from here to the Petra Kelly Foundation in Munich. If not, I can tell them that there is a need to continue the dialogue. Yeah. A little bit of history also from my side. German responsibility for war crimes committed under the Nazi regime is a heavy burden. And WILPF's foremothers from Germany, such as Anita Augsburg, Lida Gustava Heimann, they expressed loudly their warning voices since the end of World War I. They pledged for universal disarmament. They brought it. They want to bring it to Versailles. And the doors remained closed at this time. And only very few heard this warning. In 1923, they requested to expatriate Hitler. This was theoretically, legally possible already in 1923, because they said Hitler means war. They wrote and tried internationally to build up resistance against fascism and the rising violence, but stated more or less at the end of their lives in exile in Switzerland, pacifism had no chance in Germany. They ended up on the blacklist of the Nazis, and they had to flee. Others who also saw these dangers, they were transported to concentration camps. The feminist archive was destroyed. And the question remains, has pacifism never a chance? And it's really bitter to recognize that militarism is always stronger, and that you and we all had to suffer and have to suffer so much, and that we are far from learning from history. It's a big lack of peace education. And the WILPF women said from the beginning, we need the peace education on all levels, in the schools, in the university, everywhere. And it's still the responsibility for us as members to promote this peace education, even and especially probably in war times, because it's not like our actual Minister of Economy said pacifism is a faraway dream at the moment. No, it's not just for good weather. It's now, for now. And allow me just to end up with, not with this total pessimism that this has always failed until now, but to give you some very few stories actually where women do this peace education for all of us. Nina, Ukrainian friend, she said recently, I have spent my whole political life to bring people together, also across border, to talk, to train in nonviolence and prevent nationalistic, patriotic thinking, and strengthen the human aspects of life, to support women without jobs, poor women. And what can I do now? I have to continue where I am, even if it's not possible anymore in eastern Ukraine, in Donetsk. But she is traveling from Warsaw to Kiev and back at the moment. And she says, this is the only what I can do at the moment. The same story from Anna and Gulnara in Armenia. They said, we brought the young people in Artsakh together to train them to recognize fake news, to see the others as neighbors, to make them resilient against hate and permanent threats. We organized trans-Caucasian exchange from people from Chechnya, Georgia, Russia, Azerbaijan. Yeah, and we tried desperately to hold these contacts, even if it's so hard sometimes, and even if we don't hear anymore of the war in Karabakh. But the war is going on, and the Russians, without any mandate, shoot, control, are there. So, yeah. Another example, and I could enlarge this, in the Balkans, Sonia from Ljubljana, I met her in Sarajevo in 2014. This was exactly 100 years after the breakout of World War I in Sarajevo. And it was nearly exactly the same date, 20 years after the war in Bosnia. And it was 2 weeks after a terrible flood in the region, which brought out the old mines in the war, and all these stories of the enemies came up in the people again. And this was such an emotional moment where we could just cry together. We went to Srebrenica also and talked about these war crimes. But at the end, Sonia said, the best thing that we could keep is the women's network, because in all this post-conflict situation, this was the only reason which gave us economic possibilities, also political survival, because we knew that there is a network from Bosnians to Croatians to Serbians to talk about the war and about the mourning and the sexual violence and all these kind of things. And the women in black still meet nearly every year to do this. And I think this is also an extremely positive experience. And I was there in October. I was deeply impressed. And the last thing is Olga Karach, a friend from Belarus, actually living in exile in Lithuania. She organized a campaign, a wonderful campaign for Belarusian and Russian war resistors and deserters. It's extremely difficult in the very patriarchal culture of these countries and under this tyrannic regime in Belarus. But the campaign had already in the first week, they had nearly 1,000 young men who refused to go to war in Ukraine. Russians and Belarusians. And this is, I think it's an experience where we can take up what the message from Petra Kelly, we can take it further on, and I feel really very close to Petra Kelly and another friend with whom I finish, Alexander Lange. I don't know who is, for whom he is familiar. He was an Italian from South Tyrol with all the experiences of problems, also war in his region, the identity between Italy, Germany, and so on. He was an MEP also, and he invested his life really for reconciliation on the Balkans, but he wrote also little stories of jump over walls, build bridges, and he said we need to be slower, deeper, and more sweet. And this is a message, I think, taking up the ecological question also. We have to think about these messages. Yeah, and perhaps one day we can overcome war. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heidi, for that. And I want to deeply appreciate the sponsors of this event.
It's not to make it louder.
Okay. So good evening to everyone. I'm super excited to be here. I want to take this opportunity to appreciate the sponsors of this event, the hosts of this event, for inviting me. I'm deeply honored to be in your midst, all the way from Nigeria. I do not take this for granted at all. I also want to appreciate my sisters from WILPF Spain. I see a lot of them in the room. We meet again, thank you. And to my sisters in the panel with me, Carmen and Heidi, thank you very much. You've both spoken very well. This evening I'm going to be talking about integrated approach of security and peace constructions. And I just want us to reflect on the first conversation that happened, the first session, where we had our two sisters speak. And then just listening to Carmen and to Heidi. That is what we're talking about. Really listening to the conceptualization and very strong feminist analysis that came out from the first conversation. I said, this is what we need to be having, this kind of conversation at this point in time. We need more dialogues like this. And that is what WILPF stands for. We address root causes of violence through a feminist perspective. And it is only through using that feminist lens that you can bring out the complexities and the nuances on the ground. That is the conversation that has been missing, and that is the conversation that we need to promote. Now, I'm going to be looking at three key things. Why is this approach necessary? What would peace and security for all look like? And then finally, commemoration and dialogues, why we need to have them. You know, oftentimes when we have conversation like this, there is a tendency that we begin to feel that it's not working. We need to find something different. And when we get to that space, personally, I was having this conversation with a colleague and I said, when I get tired, when I begin to feel hopeless, like it seems as if it is not working, I tell myself, can you just envision a world where we all stop doing what we're doing, as in peace activists, peace builders? Can you imagine what would happen if in our own spaces, every one of us stops the dialogue, stop the work on the ground? It's going to be complete chaos. If we're doing the amount of work that we're doing right now, and we still have this level of complexities and uncertainty, this is the more reason why we can't stop. We just need to keep going on. And it's also important that we look at all the levels, at the micro level, the meso level, and the macro level. Because in the peace architecture, everyone is important. We're all playing different roles. But oftentimes is a question of control, privilege. And when we look at the dynamics of power, who has the dynamics? Who has most of the power? And so we look more at the visible people who have access to visible power, and I would say power over, and who have access to resources, and invite them to the space. Then we leave out those who are on the ground, who are feeling the impact, and who could actually create that change that we want to see. So if we're going to be looking at an approach that will work for all, it means that we need to ensure that conversations happen across all levels. No knowledge is more valid than the other. We all come with certain reality. We need to get to a space where we honor complexities, honor context, and honor connectivity. Let's look at the Ukraine-Russia war. It's not just affecting Russia and Ukraine, it's not just affecting Europe. It's affecting all of us back in Africa. What have we seen? We've seen food shortage, especially in terms of grains. Most of our grains come from Ukraine. We've seen a phenomenal increase in the price of diesel and fuel because it comes from Russia and Ukraine. So we're all connected, and it's a very complex situation. Globalization has even made it more complicated. So decisions can't just be taken just like that. They have to be well thought out. All the actors must be involved in our own spaces. I love to think about spiral effect. You know, in my little space, what I do affects you in your own space. And by the time we plot the diagram, we're all creating an impact and wielding power in our own spaces. The conversation is much more than Ukraine and Russia, like my sister Dikita pointed out. We need to look at the global conversation. If we get to the end of this crisis with Ukraine and Russia, what next? It comes back to what WILPF has been saying for close to 107 years. It comes back to that same conversation. Let's always look at the root causes of violence. We can't keep treating the symptoms. You treat the symptoms, it reappears. You treat the symptoms, it comes back. But if we can address the root causes and we start looking at patriarchy as a system of subjugation and start looking at inequalities and placing women's rights at the core of the work we do, then we can start looking at transforming power. And until we come to that space where we're comfortable to have this kind of difficult, in quotes, conversation, because the truth is when people have power, they don't want to relinquish it. They don't want to give it up. Why? It gives them control. It gives them privilege. And so that's something we don't want to give up. And that's why the work of feminists in a time like this is very important. We need to shift from the militaristic perspective of security to a more comprehensive human perspective, taking an approach looking more of peace policies rather than security policies. And I keep asking the question, if we know and we're committed to inclusive peace and sustainable peace, why would we keep spending billions in fabricating and designing weapons that we don't want to use? The truth is, when you get into that space that you're designing and keeping it, you are preparing yourself to use it. And for me, that is not showing a commitment to the peace we're talking about. At every point in time, non-violence should be non-negotiable. It's not easy, especially when you look at conflicts, either the one happening in Africa or the one happening in Europe, and we see the suffering, and those that are suffering and being killed, we say, give us more weapons. What we need is more weapons so we can fight back. That doesn't solve the crisis. Efforts needs to be placed on prevention and de-escalation. But what we see most time is an escalation. Why? There are always geopolitical agendas. There's always an economy that thrives in war. And let's not forget, where people gain and profit from, they would most likely not want to put an end to it. And so as feminists, we just have to keep speaking up. We can't get tired of having dialogues. We can't get tired of having dialogues. Dialogue like this need to happen in different spaces. And it's time we begin to connect. We've been doing a lot of that. I want to use the case of COVID. Before COVID happened, we didn't know that the world can literally shut down and we'll still be fine. We didn't know that we could do away with a lot of things. And most importantly, we've been talking about how connected we are, but COVID showed us firsthand how really connected we all are. From America to Sudan to Nigeria to Spain, we saw the connections. We saw the fluidity of our human interactions. And it was tested big time. And the question and the reflection we should be having now is moving into a phase, I want to say post-COVID, even though COVID is still here, but we're beginning to open up. And there are a lot of lessons to be learned from this. It has exposed how fragile the whole world economy is, how fragile we are as a people. So how can we build on that lessons learned, that we now harness a common approach that would speak to qualitative education, access to health care? It doesn't matter. Let's even look at the COVID vaccine. Once we started rolling it out, it became a matter of power and privilege as well. Who had access to the vaccines? So in all of this, let's also look at those, what we would think are seemingly unimportant, that gives rise to this complicated positioning. I totally loved the conversation that happened in the first session because it brought out a lot of the issues that is happening around the world. And it really answered the question why we need to have an integrated approach to security and peace. Peace is non-negotiable. It's actually a human right. Peace is a human right. And until we begin to see peace as a human right, our conversations would still remain the same. It can't change until we begin to understand that it's a human right. I have right to peace. She has right to peace. He has right to peace. We're not we've turned it into a competition where the winner takes all. If we begin to see that the world is not binary, but has a lot of shades in between, we could have and. It mustn't always be this or. There can always be and other alternatives. And because we've not been, a lot of us have not allowed ourselves to go through that route. It's always as if there's a lot of competition. And a lot is going wrong. Some conversations are seen as not important. When we talk about women's representation, it's happening across all spaces in terms of limited women representation, but in some spaces it's more visible than the others. And so we're trying to close the gap. Patriarchy it's prevalent, it shows up in all the spaces, but just the form it shows up in is where the difference lies. And we need to recognize it, and we need to confront it. And that's why I loved what my sister Heidi talked about when she said we cannot be, how did you frame it? We can't be neutral in the face of war. We can't be. We can't sit on the fence. This is a time when we need to take a stand for peace and take a stand for feminist peace. What would this really look like? It will mean that we would identify power and privileges. It will mean that we would honor contest, complexities, and connectivity. It will mean that we have a commitment to do no harm. It will also mean that we are committed to transforming power systems. And it also means that we are ready to mobilize people, because if we talk about sustainable peace, we need people. We need to mobilize people to be committed to create that change that we want to see on the ground. And this is one of the importance of what we're doing here today. When we commemorate things like this, remembering what happened 85 years ago, it has given us space and opened up space for this kind of conversations to happen. So today, tomorrow, conversations like this will be happening, and it would, get us into that mood where we begin to reflect on where we're coming from, what we are currently doing that is working, and what we could improve on. And this is really very critical. If we don't have a space or time to really reflect and evaluate what we have done, what is really working, what we could do better, then we have no means of improving our impact on the ground. And when we create commemorations, I like to take all the commemorations that happens throughout the year very importantly, because when we look at, for instance, the upcoming 16 Days of Activism, we look at the Human Rights Day, International Day of Peace, these are dates that we see a lot of mobilization. For dialogues are happening, actions are happening, and the spiral effect cannot be overemphasized. Whether we want to give up or we want to continue, we need to know that those who have committed themselves to creating both systemic structural inequalities would not give up. So when we get tired, it's okay to get tired at times because the work can be overwhelming and draining, but it's not okay to give up. We've come too far to give up. It will take the same energy to give up as it will take to keep pushing on. And so we just have to keep pushing on. A lot of women around the world would listen to this conversation we're having today and get inspired, will get motivated to keep going on. It's also about the soft conversation that happens and the very difficult conversation that happens. None more valid than the other. And when we look at knowledge production, we need to see that in each space, whether by geopolitical zones or wherever human traction we've decided to divide the world, however we want to see it, everyone is very important and every conversation is very important. And I would ask, can we just reflect and look internally and ask ourselves, how am I contributing to promoting peace? Or how am I contributing to creating conflict in the world? And we may think that what we do in our small space doesn't matter, but it all adds up. Because what happens at the micro level goes to the meso level, comes up to the macro level. When we look at those in position today, taking certain decisions, they've internalized certain value systems. And they're coming from somewhere. And that is why we keep saying, no work is less valuable. The work being done by the women in the community level trying to provide food for their family, trying to ensure that there is peace within the home, is as valid as those who are having conversation and negotiation even at the international level. There is always that resource of the local to the global and vice versa, and we can't take that for granted. One of the things WILPF has done as a movement is to promote the local to global dialogue, where we have women at the local spaces come up, speak, and then express how they see the impact on the ground and what they are doing. And this also affords those at the global level to listen and also reflect on how the policies they make, the agreements that happen, how it also interacts on the ground. We can't seclude this. We can't stop those conversations. Some may question what is the utility of bringing women from that level to the global level? What is the utility of asking those at the global level to go in country and, have conversations and find out what is happening? These are all parts of the peace process. It's a process. When we're involved in a process, we would know that it's not a state. We can't get to the state right now, but we're just going to keep pushing. And one of the things we do believe in is that peace, sustainable peace, is a must for all of us if we want to see the world in harmony. That is one key thing we can't give up on. Because after Ukraine, we're talking about Ukraine and Russia, another crisis is brewing in Mali, another crisis is brewing in Guinea-Bissau. It's happening. It's happening all around the world, and it's all connected. We look at the huge migrations happening from Africa to the West, happening from Africa to Europe to America. We have a lot of people dying in the Mediterranean Sea and all of that. Why, we ask ourselves? It's also part of the crisis that you're feeling the impact in your own country. And that's why we can't negate this kind of conversation, that peace is contextual, is a human right, and we must continue having those conversations. We need to address inequalities. As long as we've not addressed inequalities, as long as we're not choosing an outcome that places an advantage on the rights of women and girls, then we haven't started having concrete conversations. We need to start holding our states accountable. One of the reasons the Women, Peace and Security agenda is always on the front burner for most women rights organizations, because it's a transformative tool. Some of see it as a mechanism, some see it as a tool, some see it as a process. But what it has done is it's been able to harness all the different processes at a different level and bring us to a space where we're having both conversations, commitments, actions happening simultaneously. But we still need more political will to push this forward. And I'm hoping that more conversations like this would give us the space to keep putting the agenda on the table. Because what we are seeing right now is a shrinking space. Now, Emanuela, you said, one of the things you said during your presentation was that you didn't see a lot of the civil society groups from Ukraine, or the women, more representations from the women groups in Ukraine. And that's because the space is really shrinking. And the space had shrunk before the crisis began. And that is what is happening systematically across all the countries. Voices are being silenced. Especially women human rights defenders, their lives are at risk. You speak out, they take you out. So at this time, it's becoming more dangerous for women human rights defenders, women peace builders to do the work that they do on the ground. And we must also put that on the table. How do we also ensure that women who have devoted their lives to promoting and working for peace are safe? That they are not targeted? Because this is what is happening in so many countries. And so now women are getting afraid to speak out. They're getting afraid to get involved. Not just for themselves, but because of the ripple effect it has for their families, for their loved ones, and they don't want to be seen as being selfish. Even if they don't want to consider their family members to say, hey, you need to think about us as well. It's not just about you. So what are we going to do? Who do we hold accountable? What needs to change? And that is part of the reason why the conversation on integrated approach is very important. We need to look at the total picture and not just focus on the military approach. We need to hold the government accountable for always having a hard response. We are always in kinetic responses to issues that dialogue could solve. Because once you have a kinetic response to an issue, it becomes very complicated. It becomes so complex and becomes a whole lot difficult to resolve. But when we know that nonviolence is always an option, it can never be outdated. It can't be outdated. Once we do know that and we get people to commit to that, then we can have a headway. But the question now is, how then do we commit? How then do we get our voices to be heard or get our leaders to commit to this response? Because they see it as a soft response. And it's not one that they are giving to. It's not one that they are in support of. Because we have the toxic masculinity. Egos are at stake. People want to prove a point. And when they come to the table with such this thing, there's always a breakdown. Look at the case of Liberia. In country was difficult to resolve the war. Regionally it was almost difficult, but with all international efforts. It took women who said, we've had enough of this nonsense. You guys need to talk and resolve this crisis because women and children are feeling the impact. That was when the shift in the conversation happened. So how do we build the resilience of women to be able to do that work that they need to do, to be able to make conversations like this happen across? Ukraine inclusive, Ukraine, Russia instance inclusive, but even outside Ukraine and Russia, because a lot of wars are also happening. Those we know of, those are already simmering. How do we get the women's resilience built to be able to have this kind of conversation? So I want to pause for now and to leave us with all these reflections, because I believe that dialogue is always in a continuum. And it comes from a place of deep reflections, which will draw on our passion to keep doing what we are doing. Being a peace activist, being a human rights defender, comes with a lot of passion and commitment. It's not one that you're pushed into. It's one that you volunteer and commit to. And then we also need to look within our space. How do we support other women peace builders? That we are not creating more toxic environment within the movement. It's always so easy to point fingers at what is not done right and what they need to do better. But let's also know that context varies, and this also affects the approach. It doesn't make it right or wrong. It just means that it's different from your truth. And we need to come to the space where we recognize that we have different truths and realities. But can we put aside for a minute what we know to be the truth and be willing to explore together? Because that's what peace would look like. That's what inclusive peace would look like. Giving everyone the space to have their voices heard. Not silencing voices by our actions or our words. So I want to say thank you very much. This has been a very good opportunity just to have this kind of conversation, and I look to more of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carmen, Heidi, and Joy. We have talked about so many things, you know, so important things that it's difficult to sum up all of them. I will mention only some words, you know, inequalities, connections, comprehension, dialogue at different levels, conversation, causes, dissident voices, fragility, no neutrality against war, going for peace, sustainable peace for all, peace as a human right. So we have talked about Ukraine, about many other wars that are completely forgotten, that nobody talks about, you know, and all the connections that are among all of them, you know, in this human planet, or so unhuman so often, you know. So now it's time to dialogue. We have like, at 8 o'clock, I think we have to be outside. So knowing that we move slowly, we have like 10 minutes and then we can continue with our hugs, with our conversations outside, not to have Maria problem with our colleagues in the Culture House. But we have now a moment to talk, to question, to reflect, not only on your table, but on the other one that we didn't have time at the beginning. So now is your moment.
Thank you very much. I'm Savina. And more than a question, I think that I was would like to say thank you very much, because listening to the first roundtable and also the second roundtable, sometimes also we feel alone in our ideas and also in our opinion. In that moment, you need also to believe that we are not alone and that we are together. And so I was very thankful for that conversation, because giving me also the inspiration. I mean, I'm coordinating the kids Gernika, not from children, so my dialogue is more, and I learn a lot from children. And I think that also the simple things that sometimes children tell me, why we don't speak the adults? Why you don't talk? Why you don't have conversations? And so I think that is very important tonight that we are here and also on these days, because we forgot too much, several times we forgot that we are not alone, that we are all together in this world, happening horrible things everywhere. I mean, the war, unfortunately, is everywhere. More conflict are more powerful or then less powerful. But that's meaning that one is more important than the other important. That's meaning that we have to be together to avoid violence and war everywhere, also in this invisible place in the world. And so for me, tonight is just thankful because you're giving me energy, and also you're giving me a hope that we can do some things. Maybe small things, but we can. So thank you very much, both people from the first group and the second group, for this very inspiration today and for organizing that. Thank you.
Lo puedo hacer en las dos lenguas si quieren, ¿no? Es que me gustaría volver a la TICA. ¿A dónde? Okay. Gracias. Al análisis de TICA, porque ¿a dónde está? Salió. No hace falta. Es que me interesó mucho todo su análisis y que estaba acá calculando algunas cositas, que es que hablamos que una nueva, y creo que hay un consenso ya de que una nueva orden mundial se está formando, que hay tres grandes protagonistas disputándola, que es Rusia, que es Estados Unidos y China, ¿no? Con sus aliados, hitos, con más o menos capacidades como la Unión Europea y otras, Australia, Canadá, Japón y otros. Pero haciendo el cálculo, que estamos hablando acá de paz, de guerra, estamos hablando de, calculé en términos de población, estamos hablando de 1 billón y más o menos 900 millones de personas. Nos quedan en el mundo más de casi 7 billones de personas. ¿A dónde están en nuestros análisis? ¿A dónde están? Es como si fuera de una vez, me perdonen, pero yo estoy viniendo de un país sin guerra y no basta para mí hablar de guerras olvidadas, ¿no? Que me parece es que nuestros análisis hablan mucho de los horrores de la guerra y muy bien, de las denuncias que tenemos que hacer, que de los nuevos órdenes mundiales, de todo eso, pero a mí me sentí un poco sola, porque me dijo que casi 7 billones de personas no entran en nuestros análisis. Y sus tragedias, como toda la globalización, conecta y desconecta sobre el placer los que viven, los que no viven. Hay un concepto muy interesante, creo que de Carmen, que es las zonas de existencia vital, pero me gustaría mucho de que habláramos también de las zonas de sacrificio, que para mí son la mayoría de la población mundial. Estoy muy triste con la guerra en Ucrania, estoy muy triste, pero me perdone, pero lo que hay más es guerras, guerras que también hacen parte de ese orden, de ese nuevo orden mundial que se está formando y que nosotros también y nosotras no, parece que no vemos. Solo eso, gracias.
No, ya lo he entendido, ya.
Pero si quieres hacerle esto. No, Antica, digo.
Ay, Antica, no, es después tuyo. Solo para decir que me gustó mucho lo que habló Tica, porque me hizo pensar que todas estas maniobras de una nueva orden mundial parece que no existe más que la Rusia, que la China y que la Unión Europea, que hace, perdone de la palabra, mierda en todo el mundo. Y por favor, me disculpen por la mala palabra, pero es lo que siento, ¿no? Solo para decir que acá estamos muy europeas, muy blanquitas, solo Joy, que no es tan blanquita como nosotras, tal vez un poco Liliana, que también no es tan blanquita, pero no es una cuestión de color de piel, creo que es una cuestión de una visión un poco menos autocentrada, no sé si en nuestros análisis, solo eso, nada más, gracias.
Bueno, no quería hablar porque, bueno, ya he tenido la palabra, pero bueno, me gustaría reaccionar a lo que dice Teresa, porque yo creo que, no es cierto que lo que está sucediendo ahora sea eurocéntrico, que yo creo que, desgraciadamente, afecta a todo el mundo, desgraciadamente. O sea, es decir, que... Y no sé, es decir, claro que hay otros conflictos, hay muchísimos conflictos y creo que el problema es que no podemos hablar de todos al mismo tiempo, ¿no? O sea, que el conflicto árabe-israelí, terrible, o sea, el conflicto... O sea, y yo creo que precisamente, las organizaciones de paz trabajamos con distintos lugares y tenemos nuestras áreas de análisis y precisamente yo creo que una de las dificultades que tenemos en esta guerra, en esta invasión de Rusia en Ucrania, precisamente el problema que tenemos es que es una zona en la que no hemos trabajado, por eso no tenemos redes, vínculos, etcétera, o muy poca gente ha trabajado, por lo menos en el contexto de España. Pero desgraciadamente, y no debería ser así, o sea, los grandes olvidados del planeta no solamente, es decir, les va a afectar, es decir, ojalá no les afectara, pero no es real, les va a afectar porque precisamente tal como es el orden internacional genera toda una serie de dinámicas que desgraciadamente va a afectar a los países africanos, les va a afectar, y yo hoy lo ha comentado, pues porque no va a haber muchas más hambrunas, desgraciadamente esas dinámicas militaristas afectan, tienen impactos ambientales que afectan a todo el mundo, es decir, que está ahí, o sea, yo creo que no creo que hablemos de cosas diferentes, el no mencionarlos, el hablar de conflictos olvidados que se queda demasiado pequeño, yo también estoy de acuerdo, se queda demasiado pequeño, pero lo cierto es que en este momento lo que ocurre en otros lugares nos afecta, ¿no? Y claro, tampoco podemos hablar de todo al mismo tiempo. Pero claro que es muy importante, o sea, yo creo que precisamente lo que me gusta, por ejemplo, de la red de WILPF es que hay toda una red de organizaciones que pueden tener voz, tienen algún espacio en el que tú tienes la oportunidad de tener un espacio de conversación pues, con una mujer de la India o con una mujer de algunos países, no de todos, ¿no? Pero existen esos espacios, pero esos espacios no son, desde el ámbito de las redes de sociedad civil, no son fáciles, ¿no? Y hay que crearlos, construirlos, etcétera. Pero yo creo que la concepción sí que están presentes, o por lo menos están presentes en todo nuestro trabajo, están presentes y nos duelen aunque no los mencionemos, pero los tenemos ahí de Nicaragua bueno, al Líbano, es decir, están ahí. Lo que pasa es que, bueno, al final es inabarcable, ¿no? Realmente, y por eso yo creo que siempre es muy bonito buscar donde hay inspiración. Cuando dices, me inspira, el trabajo con la infancia es muy inspirador, me inspira Chile, que tiene un momento de cambio, o sea, porque necesitamos referencias también, pues para tirar para adelante, ¿no? O sea, que, y por ejemplo, nosotras estamos muy orgullosas de tener una presidenta de Nigeria. Bueno, pues oye, es una oportunidad porque no es tan fácil tampoco tener espacios de encuentro y de conversación pues con personas a lo mejor de otros lugares en los que no hay redes en nuestro contexto, y yo creo que eso también tiene un valor. Me lo dejo aquí.
Sí. ¿Quién quiere hablar? ¿Tiene el micrófono?
Bueno, yo quisiera agradecer todas las intervenciones que han sido, yo creo que muy valiosas, y también hacer un recordatorio de que se lleva trabajando muchos años por tener instrumentos para cambiar y transformar las relaciones, la forma de conectar y de resolver los conflictos. Y, por ejemplo, solo hablamos de la amenaza nuclear creciente que este conflicto nos está trayendo, y se habla poco de los instrumentos que tenemos encima de la mesa para realmente poder tomar una posición audaz y avanzada hacia cambiar las dinámicas, por ejemplo, que podríamos hacerlo a través del Tratado sobre la Prohibición de las Armas Nucleares. Es un trabajo de largo recorrido de las organizaciones de todo el planeta, que han contado también con la participación de las mujeres y de muchas organizaciones como, por ejemplo, WILPF y otras hermanas nuestras como el Centre de las o otras organizaciones que a nivel local también han trabajado intensamente. Pero se nos olvida que todo ese esfuerzo está durante muchos años a disposición de la sociedad civil para ser apoyado y marcar esa diferencia que necesitamos y que abra una ventana de oportunidad a la paz. Es decir, los instrumentos, el trabajo existen. Es cierto que en ocasiones nos sentimos muy defraudadas, lamentamos mucho la impotencia ante las derivas belicistas que se imponen, pero siempre también tenemos que recordar que hay trabajos constantes, sostenidos, de muchísimas personas y organizaciones en todo el planeta que trabajan por construir diferentes alternativas y relaciones internacionales, y una muy concreta es el Tratado sobre la Prohibición de las Armas Nucleares, que es un tratado que ha entrado en vigor hace más de un año, y que nuestro gobierno, por concretar las responsabilidades, nuestro gobierno, el gobierno español, el Estado español, no ha dado indicios de firmarlo. Y en Alemania y en un contexto de OTAN, efectivamente parece que hay, pero sin embargo lo que necesitamos es, si nuestro gobierno, si nuestros gobernantes quieren la paz, tienen que trabajar para la paz. No vale solamente con mostrar una posición proclive a la venta de armamentos, que no hace más que incendiar y aumentar el conflicto, y sin embargo orillar decisiones valientes y audaces que tendrían el apoyo mayoritario de la sociedad civil y que marcarían un nuevo rumbo justamente en situaciones de dificultad, porque la paz se construye cada día y también con audacia en los momentos de complejidad. Yo creo que es justamente un trabajo, una herramienta que está encima de la mesa y que la sociedad civil de todos los países y la sociedad civil española tiene que conocer y apoyar para marcar un punto de inflexión en un momento en donde la amenaza nuclear parece que es sin duda alguna más acuciante, pero que nunca ha dejado de estar encima de la mesa.
¿Puedo? Vale, sí. En ese sentido, siguiendo con lo que decía Laura, creo que es importante también que hacia la sociedad presentemos los avances, los éxitos que hemos tenido en el movimiento. Y el Tratado de Prohibición de Armas Nucleares es un ejemplo. Es un ejemplo que se puede conseguir, como se consiguió el Tratado de Comercio de Armas unos años antes, que no teníamos, ¿no? Es decir, no solo mostrar que no podemos, que no hay avances, sí que hay avances. Y justamente en el Tratado de Prohibición de Armas Nucleares, WILPF se involucró, una de nuestras compañeras de Nueva York y toda la organización, y estas cosas hay que ponerlas en la sociedad para que se vea que es posible esa acción. Y ya solo otro punto que me parece importante dentro del análisis de globalidad que estamos haciendo es sobre las Naciones Unidas. WILPF trabajó desde el principio para que hubiera un órgano internacional donde se dirimieran los conflictos de intereses entre países, Sociedad de Naciones y después Naciones Unidas. Y ahora estamos viendo cómo va siendo relegada las Naciones Unidas. Y la toma de decisiones global se enfoca hacia el G20, el G8, están ninguneando a las Naciones Unidas. Entonces, esa es otra de las tareas que tenemos que coger en nuestras manos, cómo transformar las Naciones Unidas para, por ejemplo, evitar el veto. O sea, ahora mismo, los 5 países que tienen poder de veto, pues uno de ellos es Rusia, ¿no? Entonces, esa es otra tarea. Y con respecto a lo que decía Teresa, bueno, WILPF trabaja por una paz con justicia social y económica y además en una situación de defensa de la naturaleza. Tenemos un manifiesto del 2015 donde se puede ver y como han dicho mis compañeras, pues en las distintas secciones nacionales se trabaja en esa línea. O sea que tienes mucha razón, es verdad. Solo apuntar una cosa, nosotras cuando oímos billones, esos son anglosajones, para nosotros no son tantos, ¿no? Pero aún así el problema es grande. El problema es grande. No, eso es solo un punto. Ya está.
Muy bien. Se acabó. Bueno, creo que hay mucha conversación para hoy, para mañana, pero es hora de concluir. ¿Vai? Sí, pero son las 8 menos 1 y a las 8 creo que nos cierran, entonces, como no queremos más conflictos con nadie, creados por nosotras, seguimos fuera. Entonces, recordaros a todas y a todos que no solamente mañana continuaremos en Gernika, sino también las jornadas de Gernikako gogoratuz sobre geopolíticas de paz continuarán en Donosti y se podrán retransmitir, se retransmitirán vía streaming también, creo, ¿no? Otra conexión, sí. Eta eskerrik asko, María, ez dakit.